Celebrated for its politeness, diversity, and progressive values, but beneath this facade lies a dark chapter. Over a century witnessed the forced assimilation of at least 150,000 Indigenous children into residential schools filled with abuse. Thousands died, and the survivors, as well as their descendants, bear the trauma. This is Canada's haunting past. Stolen childhoods. For First Nation, the painful legacy of the residential school system stretches back to the 1880s. What initially began as a partnership between the Canadian government and church organizations, with many First Nation bands even welcoming the idea of education and skills training, quickly deteriorated into a brutal mechanism of assimilation. Indigenous children were forcibly taken from their families and placed in these church-run institutions, where the objective shifted from education to aggressive cultural extermination. Inside these schools, students were stripped of their language, traditions, and identities. They endured meager provisions, scant medical care, and rampant physical and sexual abuse. The curriculum systematically ignored and punished any observance of Native traditions and ceremonies. It's a chilling fact that thousands perished due to disease and neglect, many of whom were buried in unmarked graves on school premises. By the time the last federally run school closed its doors in 1996, over 150,000 children had suffered this traumatic separation. This grim era, which the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has termed cultural cleansing, is an indelible scar on Canada's history. The anguish of this past was brought into sharp focus in 2021 when the Tecumlup's Te Sequepunk unveiled a distressing discovery: over 200 suspected unmarked graves at the former Kamloops residential school grounds. This revelation sparked widespread national dismay. However, subsequent investigations have raised questions. A dig near the Our Lady of Seven Sorrows Church, another former residential school site, revealed 14 suspected grave sites, but curiously, no human remains were found. Some experts speculate that initial ground-penetrating radar or GPR indications might have mistaken tree roots or rocks for graves. Excavations at Kamloops remain pending. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the exact number of unmarked graves, the undeniable truth is that countless children suffered and died in these institutions, and their stories, buried for so long, are finally surfacing. The quest for understanding and justice continues as Canada confronts this haunting past. Generational scars. The wounds of the residential school system continue to reverberate across generations, leaving a trail of anguish and sorrow. The long-standing effects of being deprived of a nurturing environment have manifested in a myriad of ways, including emotional challenges and societal difficulties. For many former students, the absence of typical parenting models resulted in them growing up emotionally underdeveloped, leading to an increased vulnerability to struggles like alcoholism, substance abuse, and domestic violence. These issues became tragically prevalent as individuals tried to cope with the buried trauma of their formative years in residential schools. Societal challenges rooted in the loss of culture and traditional parenting practices became inherited burdens, passing down to subsequent generations. Many children and grandchildren of residential school survivors found themselves grappling with the weight of unresolved trauma, often unaware of its origins in their family's history. The echoes of the past continue to manifest in myriad ways, from mental health challenges to struggles with identity and belonging. Between 2022 and 2023, there was a growing recognition of the generational impact of the residential school system. This awareness led to increased investments in mental health resources, cultural revitalization programs, and community-driven healing initiatives. The Canadian government and various organizations collaborated with Indigenous communities to foster environments where understanding and healing could take place. In response to the grim discoveries of unmarked graves, memorial events and national days of reflection were established to acknowledge the dark chapters of history and to ensure they are never forgotten. Moreover, educational institutions across Canada began incorporating more comprehensive Indigenous histories and perspectives into their curricula, aiming to educate future generations about the past injustices and the importance of reconciliation. Despite these steps forward, the pain remains palpable for many. Indigenous communities, while resilient, are still on a challenging journey towards healing and rebuilding. The scars, while slowly being addressed, underscore the profound need for continuous effort, understanding, and support from all segments of society. The missing and eliminated. The issue of missing and eliminated Indigenous women and girls in Canada remains a pressing concern. As of recent updates, the numbers continue to rise, emphasizing the persistent vulnerabilities faced by Indigenous women and girls. The RCMP's estimates in the past noted over 1,200 cases since 1980, but many believe the actual number to be significantly higher, given unreported or underreported instances. Areas like the Highway of Tears have become infamous due to the high number of unsolved disappearances and crimes. Between 2020 and 2023, there has been a growing awareness and acknowledgement of this crisis. Efforts have been made at various governmental levels to address and redress this issue. Public campaigns, both online and offline, have sought to raise awareness and put pressure on institutions to take more robust actions. However, many families and communities feel that investigations have not always been carried out with the urgency or thoroughness they deserve. The sentiment that racial inequity plays a role in the handling of these cases remains strong among critics. The lasting impact on families who continue to seek answers and closure cannot be understated. To promote understanding and awareness, there have been several initiatives launched in the past few years, including documentaries, awareness marches, and educational campaigns. These aim to shed light on the issue, commemorate the lives lost, and ensure that the urgency of the situation is not forgotten. In response to public outcry, some steps have been taken to enhance investigation procedures and ensure more support for affected families. Still, the journey towards achieving justice and safeguarding Indigenous women and girls remains a work in progress. The issue serves as a poignant reminder of the broader challenges faced by Indigenous communities and the pressing need for societal change and understanding. Health inequity, life expectancy, and infant mortality. Recent trends suggest that life expectancy on reserves has not shown significant improvements. The life expectancy of First Nation people falls 4 to 5 years short of the national average. Infant mortality rates, while fluctuating, remain distressingly 2 to 3 times higher than for non-Indigenous Canadians. Chronic conditions. As of 2022, diabetes continued to be an escalating concern among Indigenous adults. Diabetes is twice as prevalent among Indigenous adults, and they encounter tuberculosis rates that are a staggering 300 times higher. Healthcare spending disparities. Even with increased awareness and advocacy in the early 2020s, the gap in healthcare spending is 30% lower on a per capita basis compared to other Canadians. Water and sanitation. Despite governmental promises and initiatives, many reserves still lacked consistent access to clean water by 2022. As of late 2022, 50 Indigenous communities lived under boil water advisories. Others lack running water or sanitation. Contamination causes diseases like E. coli. In some nations, kids are airlifted out for weeks at a time when water is undrinkable. UN experts in 2020 called the water situation a human rights crisis. Environmental toxins. Communities like Grassy Narrows First Nation continued their advocacy, highlighting the long-term effects of mercury poisoning and other environmental toxins. Dental care. Access to dental care remained a challenge, especially in remote communities, despite initiatives aimed at improving healthcare infrastructure. Land theft and poverty. Despite ancestral ties, many reservations live in third world poverty while occupying just 0.2% of Canada's land. Broken 19th century treaties robbed the First Nation of vast swaths of territory. Remaining lands lacked infrastructure or economic opportunity. Unemployment on reserve reaches over 20%, triple the national rate. Per capita income is 30 to 50% lower than other Canadians. Nearly 1 in 4 Indigenous people live in homes needing major repairs, triple the national figure. Even today, resource extraction degrades ancestral lands while Indigenous communities see minimal benefits. Throughout Canada's history, Indigenous communities have grappled with significant land and resource challenges rooted in broken treaties and colonial practices. As we enter the 2020s, these challenges remain pronounced and multifaceted. By the early 2020s, while many Indigenous communities still occupy only a fraction of their ancestral lands, there has been increasing public discourse and legal action surrounding land rights and treaty obligations. Indigenous-led movements and negotiations with the Canadian government have sought the return and protection of traditional territories and to address historical wrongs. Infrastructure on many reserves saw slight improvements between 2020 and 2023, thanks in part to increased federal funding and collaboration between First Nation and various stakeholders. The economic disparities, however, remain concerning. By 2023, unemployment rates on some reserves remained high, though initiatives led by Indigenous communities themselves, like local entrepreneurship programs and partnerships with businesses, have made strides in providing more opportunities. Still, many reserves grapple with unemployment rates significantly higher than the national average. The income gap, while slowly narrowing, persists, with many Indigenous people earning significantly less than the national average. Regarding resource extraction, debates around land use and environmental protection intensified between 2020 and 2023. Projects impacting ancestral lands have faced more rigorous scrutiny, thanks in part to Indigenous-led environmental movements and legal challenges. However, concerns remain about whether Indigenous communities are adequately consulted and benefiting from these projects.